Thank you to National Defense University for hosting us for today's public meeting. My name is Chris Burnett, and I am the designated federal officer for the Defense Innovation Board. If you have not done so already, please silence your electronic devices. Today's meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend the meeting virtually. Thank you to the Defense Media Activity for providing their expert support to this event. Welcome to all of our in-person and virtual attendees. The board will now convene its public session. As we begin this public meeting, allow me to share a few procedural remarks. This board is a discretionary, independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government in the Sunshine Act. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Register notice posted Friday, February 15th. The public was invited to submit written comments for the board members to consider. 6 written comments were received in advance of today's meeting and will be posted online with the minutes of this meeting. There have been no significant changes to the meeting's agenda as posted in the Federal Register notice. Depending on time constraints, there may be an opportunity for members of the public to provide verbal comments to the board today at the end of the meeting. As a reminder, these are comments to the board, not a question and answer session. With that, I now turn the meeting over to our board's Executive Director, Joshua Marcuse, for opening remarks and introduction of the board members.
Thanks very much, Bruno. Welcome, everyone, and special thanks to the National Defense University for hosting us, particularly Ambassador Chacon, who's here. Thank you very much. We're excited to hold this public meeting at a premier institution of joint professional military education, something of a homecoming for me because I was an intern here 15 years ago, and it's exciting to be on stage instead of taking notes. This is our 10th public meeting since October 2016 when the board was founded. It's my great pleasure to introduce the board members, starting with our chair, Dr. Eric Schmidt, technical advisor of Alphabet, former CEO of Google, and former chairman of Alphabet. We have Dr. Missy Cummings, the director of the Humans and Autonomy Lab and professor of engineering at Duke University, also one of the first female fighter pilots in the Navy. We have Mr. Kurt Del Bene, the Chief Digital Officer of Microsoft, Dr. Eric Lander, the President and Founding Director of the Broad Institute in Boston, Dr. Michael McQuaid, the Vice President of Research at Carnegie Mellon University, Mr. Milo Medin, the Vice President of Wireless Services at Google, Dr. Richard Murray, Professor of Control and Dynamical Systems of Bioengineering at Caltech, Dr. Mark Strangelo, the Entrepreneur in Residence at the University of Colorado and the former executive of Sierra Nevada Corporation, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Director of the Hayden Planetarium. And then on the phone, we're joined by Mr. Walter Isaacson, who's a history professor at Tulane and former president of the Aspen Institute. Walter, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you very much, Joshua.
Excellent. We have Ms. Marnie Levine, who's the Vice President of Global Partnerships and Business Development at Facebook. Marnie?
I'm here. Thanks.
Terrific.
Yep.
And Ms. Jennifer Polka, the founder and executive director of Code for America and the former deputy chief technology officer of the U.S. government. Jen? Well, we do have a quorum. Hopefully, Jen will join us for the swap discussion. We've seen a great deal of change in the department since our inception in 2016, and there's much to celebrate. At the same time, our original tasking from the Secretary of Defense to identify and advise the department's most significant technical, organizational, and operational challenges remains as relevant as ever. We have a packed agenda today, and let me describe that for you. First, the board will discuss the software acquisition and practices study we affectionately call the SWAP study, the culmination of a year-long effort commissioned by Congress. We hope to vote on the study today, and we will deliver the board's findings to the department in the next 2 weeks. After that, the department will send the report to Congress in early May. We're fortunate to have a very special guest here to address the board, Ms. Ellen Lord. She's the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, who is the sponsor of this study. After that, the board will describe its 5G study, which is currently underway. The study is mostly classified, so consequently, I apologize, that will be a very brief update. Third, the board will provide updates and context for its ongoing AI principles work, which has involved a series of consultative sessions throughout the year, most recently as last week at Carnegie Mellon University, where we held a public listening session and an expert roundtable. The board will continue to collect a variety of perspectives on AI ethics to inform its work on this topic. Fourth, we'll provide an implementation update, as always, on how the department is taking action on some of the ideas proposed in the board's recommendations, underscoring the numerous organizations in the department that recognize the urgent need for reform. And fifth, the board will hear from Dr. Lisa Porter, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Dr. Porter will be sharing her perspective on innovation in the department. And as always, we'll close with public comments, when members of the audience, hopefully all of you, will engage the board directly and provide your perspective for 2 minutes. And we're quite strict about that. So now I'd like to ask the chairman of the board, Dr. Schmidt, to say a few words before we hear from Undersecretary Lord.
Thank you, Josh, and it's great to be here at the NDU. We're joined today by two extraordinary leaders in the Pentagon, Undersecretary Lord and Dr. Porter, who we've had the chance to work with now for quite some time, and you'll be seriously impressed by their comments and what they've been able to achieve. We missed our January meeting for reasons that are obvious to all of you, but we tried really hard, so we're going to make it up with today's meeting. I think much of our work has been recently on the SWAP study, which I'm beyond proud of. I think it's one of the finest pieces of work that I've seen done anywhere in the government. And I think you'll understand that the principles that the SWAP study talks about are applicable not just to the DoD, but to, in fact, startups, software in general, and so forth. And because of the unique and strange rules that we operate under, every single thing we did was done in complete public comment. So not only do we know what we think, but we also know what you all think, because you all have been participating. And it's been really fun to do it in a completely crowdsourced and open way. I wanted to acknowledge Gilman Louie and Trey Stevens, who are here in the audience. They are, shall we say, incoming. And we're looking forward to having them get through the process and be joining us here. Their contributions, I think, will become clear over the next 6 months, but I already know that they're going to have a huge impact. So from my perspective, I think this is the next iteration in influence that we've been able to achieve. It started with our focus on AI, which produced the JAIC and other things like that. And now we're sort of working deeper inside of the way the behemoth, if you will, works, with, I hope, a corresponding level of impact. So with that, perhaps Undersecretary, you would like to, Josh, you want to sort of introduce her?
Yes, absolutely will. We are honored to have Ms. Ellen Lord, the Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment, with us today to provide some remarks on software acquisition to set the stage for today's discussion. Ms. Lord is responsible for all matters pertaining to acquisition, developmental testing, contract administration, logistics and material readiness, installations and environment, operational energy, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, the acquisition workforce, and the defense industrial base. Prior to government, Ms. Lord served as the president and CEO of Textron Systems Corporation, where she led a Okay. There's a lot more to say.
Thank you, Josh. That gets a little boring after a while, and I'm really excited to be here this morning because it's a unique opportunity to partner with industry, and I believe that our opportunity is to really grow the defense ecosystem by bringing industry and government closer together. One of the fantastic opportunities we have at the department is that a lot of great Americans are true patriots, and they give of themselves in different ways. And this particular group, and Trey and Gilman seem to be here, are giving their time, their expertise to us to help solve really tough problems we have. And the thought partnership is invaluable. So I am very honored to be able to work with everyone. I am beyond excited about what the team has accomplished because we are going to begin to implement it actually today. So let me talk a little bit about my role, my responsibilities, how I'm focusing the time that my department has. Everything I do comes under the framework of the National Defense Strategy. So I align our efforts under the 3 lines of effort that the NDS has. 1 is lethality, 2 is strengthening alliances and partnerships, and 3rd is reform. If I back away from that for a moment and think about what is it that I'm really responsible to do, I believe it's 2 things. 1 is to get capability downrange to the warfighter as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. And then secondly, to make sure that we have a thriving, healthy, growing industrial base that venture capital and Wall Street wants to invest in, because unless we have that healthy industrial base, we will not be able to deliver to the warfighter. So if I take all of that and translate it into what are we going to focus on, if I look at line of effort number 1, lethality, we're warfighters, I believe we can make a difference in terms of policy we develop, instructions that we write, implementing that we do, if we look at the largest programs we have in the department. So I have chosen to focus on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the greatest fighter aircraft in the world today, that we have multiple partners joining with us on around the world. And secondly, the nuclear triad, because again, we really achieve peace through strength, and our nuclear deterrence is a very, very important part of that. Over the last 20 or 30 years, our nuclear triad has really crumbled, and we are now in the process of developing a new submarine, the Columbia class, a new bomber, the B-21, new weapons, long-range standoff weapon, ground-based strategic deterrent. All of this being done in conjunction with the Department of Energy, the NNSA. So it brings the whole of government to the problem. Secondly, line of effort number 2, strengthening alliances and partnerships, is all about the fact that when the U.S. goes to war, we do not go alone. We go with our partners and our allies. We have to be able to communicate and be interoperable with our partners and allies in the multi-domain battle. That's why technology areas such as 5G are so important to us. The ability to be autonomous, the ability to communicate downrange is vital, and we have to be able to work with partners and allies to be able to communicate, and we have to utilize 5G to do that. Finally, the third line of effort is reform. And while we are looking at all kinds of different acquisition authorities Congress has given us over the last 4 years, particularly different contract types, how we take specific contracts and couple them with different authorities, a lot of very important work there. I believe that an overarching issue we have is to bifurcate hardware and software as we develop our warfighting systems. To that end, we are rewriting DoD Instruction 5000.02 this year. It is a huge, huge, daunting instruction that we somewhat glibly tell our acquisition professionals that they should tailor down to meet their needs. Simplify it as, works for you. The trouble is, it is very difficult to wrap your brain around all of 5000.02, and we typically have not taught it in a way that it's easy to implement. Not that we haven't taught it well, we just haven't taught it in a way that's easy to implement. So what we're doing is rewriting 5000.02, and we are going to have one process for hardware and one process for software, because truly I believe our future warfighting capability depends on hardware-enabled and software-defined warfighting systems. We need to take those hardware platforms and continue to spiral in software to deliver more and more capability. So the work that the SWAP team has done is absolutely center cut to everything we're trying to do. Because if we look at the way we are structured to fund programs, it's in a very serial, systematic fashion. We can do that with hardware to a degree, but we know as you move from traditional waterfall software development to Agile and DevOps, we need to be coding every day and testing every night. And we have a continuum between development, production, and sustainment of software. We believe we need a software color of money in order to be able to do that. We also need to be very, very thoughtful about cybersecurity. If there is anything, well, let me put it this way. The item that has changed the most since I have been at DoD for the last 18 months or so, it's been the cyber security imperative. We have threats. Every day we are being attacked, and the attack surface is huge. A large part of that is our software. So we need to think about not only how we develop, but how we deploy software. And I'm not even referring now to the classified SAP systems that we have, but I'm talking about the unclassified software. When you aggregate it all, you end up with a classified situation. We've had many dumps, many leaks, many attacks over the last 5 years or so, and they are accelerating. So we're doing a lot of things on the defensive side that are important that we have to do. We are taking rather general NIST cybersecurity standards. We're saying that this year we will develop cybersecurity standards, somewhat analogous to what we have as ISO standards for quality. We will have cybersecurity standards that have metrics and that you can audit to. We will stand up third-party auditors to be able to do that. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient to get us to the secure environment, a resilient and secure software environment that we need. So what are we doing? We're trying to go on the offense, not just the defense here. We are working on several Pathfinder projects that we call DevSecOps, where we are coming up with a secure environment that we frankly would like to sort of GFE, government furnished equipment, to companies. The large companies don't really need this. Our large primes are very savvy. They have the funds to create hardened environments. What I'm concerned about especially is the small companies where our innovation comes from, where when we sit down and talk to them about cybersecurity, we sometimes hear, no kidding, my nephew does my cybersecurity. That gets us a little bit worried. And we know that we will either put these small companies out of business or we will drive them away from the Department of Defense if we give them very, very onerous regulations to meet. So what we've decided to do is we will set up hardened containers in an enclave, in a government cloud, or a cloud hosted for us. And we will provide these hardened containers that if industry goes in and uses them, develops their software using our stack, then they will automatically get an authority to operate, really a time crunch issue for us when we're trying to deploy capability quickly. We have Pathfinder projects right now doing that. That's going to become more and more important for us. As we began this whole discussion of how do we do software differently, how do we do it at speed? Because frankly, speed is the critical variable here. We needed some help. And that's where we used our, what I call, board of directors at DoD. I tend to use industry analogies, and I look at Congress as DoD's board of directors. We went to them for help and said, help us, help you, help us, and asked them to write some language in the NDAA directing us to do a software study, looking at what the department has done well, successfully, what they haven't done well, why they've been unsuccessful, and help us get a group of diverse, experienced subject matter experts to tell us what we really need to do and point us in the right direction. That's what the SWAP study has been all about. It's very DevOps-like. It has been constant churn and test and come up with the next version of what right looks like in terms of software development. So what we've ended up with is a framework of recommendations conversations that was enabled by having numerous working teams that have come back from DoD and industry telling us their thoughts. This has all been codified in the materials that are publicly available on the website. There's an enormous effort that's gone into this. I am so looking forward to partnering with Congress on this moving forward. There's been a high level of interaction with both the House and the Senate, a high level of interaction throughout DoD. So what we are starting this afternoon is implementing what we're learning, and I very much look forward to the team delivering the final report to Congress, and looking forward to seeing language in the 20 NDAA that enables us to do software quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary Lord. Now we will open our discussion, and I'll turn it over to you, Eric, to kick us off.
Thank you. I think you can see why my comments about Secretary Lord were, if anything, under praiseworthy. Her commitment to making things happen is extraordinary, and we look forward to working with you in any way we can assist the mission that you've outlined. This study starts with some heroines, who I wanted to mention. A woman named Bess Dobkin, who's here in the audience, started this project by, and she assembled a team very, very quickly of Courtney Barno, Devon Hardy, and Sandy, is it Odia, who are here? Where are they? Hiding. They're hiding in the back.
Outside working.
And let's just say that we neither think nor write as well as they do, and they get a lot of the credit. So as Bess moved on to the Capitol Hill, we were fortunate that Secretary Lord had recruited a very senior software executive named Jeff Bowling, who we immediately seconded into our group. So he's sort of dual-hatted between us and the Secretary. And we've committed to keeping our collaboration with you, Jeff, to make this thing happen. So there's a long history in the Pentagon of people writing reports and nothing happened. In fact, when we started, we had a rule that we would never write a report, and then the Congress wrote a law that said we had to. So this is an important historical fact that we are forced to do this with you, Jeff, and we better do it well together. But I cannot thank the staff enough. I think, Michael, maybe what we should do is start with you.
Well, it just occurred to me, if Congress forces us to write a report, can we force them to pay attention to it? Does it work that way?
That's a very, very good question.
I'm just wondering.
So who's Richard and Michael, so okay. Whoever wants to get started.
So Richard Murray and I are the co-chairs of the S&T subcommittee for the DIV and the co-chairs of the SWAP study. Thank you. And so we're going to tag team this a little bit back and forth. I would add my thanks to everybody. The other thing I would say is when we get all done with my introduction and the results of the study, I would encourage you to go back and replay Undersecretary Lord's comments, because they will be exactly what I'm going to tell you over the next few minutes about the process. So the alignment between the customer for what we're trying to do and the process we've used and what we try to accomplish is better than I have ever seen. So let's see if we can make this work. Can I lean forward and see the slide? So this started with a charge from Congress in the FY18 NDAA to review the acquisition processes and structures to improve the way we do software and to maintain the advantage for software in the Department of Defense, to identify through examination of various case studies, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a moment, to look at providing specific recommendations across the stakeholders as to how we can improve both legislatively and non-legislatively, and then any additional recommendations that we bring. So this was the charge in the FY18 NDAA. It set a very strict timeline on us. It was 1 year, and the part that took the longest was actually getting from the NDAA to standing up and getting terms of reference done. But once it happened, it's been a terrific year for all of us. It'll be really good when it's a terrific year that's over. In terms of deliverables from the study, proposed statutory changes and suggestions for new language to modernize the way we do software, necessary regulatory changes that would either support or help work around those changes. Very specifically, investigate and deliver organizational and cultural practice changes. And then a big theme as we have gone along, and you will see in the way we go through some of the talk recommendations, relates to being a much more data-driven software process. So data-driven in the way we do software, data-driven in the way we manage software, data-driven in the way we take the results of the software and use those across the department. And so those were the deliverables that we had lined up. You've heard the names. So the way we do these kind of things is make the thing go forward. There we go. So we have an actual swap committee that is made up of members from the Defense Innovation Board. So it's Richard and me and Milo Medin, who is here, and Jen Palka, who is, we think, on the line. Those are the DIB members who have been a part of this study. And then we recruited several consultants from outside, names you've heard before, Gilman Louie and Trey Stevens, who have been part of this effort from the beginning. In addition to that, there were hundreds of people who were either interviewed, conversed with, provided input, and did some significant work, as you will see as we go forward. So this is an a usual slide to talk about our approach of what we did for the year. I will call your attention to two things. The sort of line down at the bottom, which is about releases. So I'll make a reference now and I'll make it later. We have approached this study in the way we believe software should be approached, and that is as an iterative process. You will see that in the way the study was generated. So we have been very public about working drafts of the materials. They started with a set of thought pieces that we have done over the course of the last year, beginning with the infamous 10 Commandments, and going up to release of the various draft versions of the elements of the report. And we have done that very intentionally. At a certain point, law requires us to say, here's a finished product and here's what we're going to vote on. But it's the process that matters more than anything else. And so there's an iterative element to the way we have done this study, and that's what you see across the bottom, along with links to all the different pieces that we've done. The second iterative part that you will get, and I'll reiterate it again when we start to go through the recommendations, is that we believe that the approach to executing the recommendations in the study should also be iterative. So while you will see recommendations and action items, they should serve as a starting point for an implementation plan that goes like this. We try something, we talk to users, we see if it works, and if it works, we amplify it, and if it doesn't work, we fix it and we move forward. So if you could keep that in mind as we go through this whole conversation, we will have accomplished a big part of what we're trying to do here. Above that, sort of the second blue bar from the top, were a whole series of site visits we did sort of early in the process, and they involved investigations and discussions, very, very open discussions with teams who you might have argued had a lot to protect and were extraordinarily open with us. Major weapon systems, small programs, big business programs, across the board, we were very, very welcome and spent a significant amount of time understanding the whats and the whys and the hows of certain programs that occurred across the department. And that became important food for us as we work through the recommendations, et cetera. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to Richard then, and then we'll come back and go through the recommendations.
Great, thank you, Michael. So what I wanted to do is to just say a little bit about the structure of the recommendations and what's there, and then we'll walk through some of those recommendations. So the way we've structured the report is that there's a main report that's relatively short, that tries to capture the key elements that we think are there. And so one of the things that we did early on as we were going through and doing our site visits and other things was identify some key themes that go throughout the report in terms of what we think the Department and Congress need to work on together in terms of making software work for national security. One is that speed and cycle time matter. And so it really does matter to be able to iterate on software and get it out to the field quickly and have it be useful for people. And so you'll see that coming throughout what we're doing. The second is that software is really about people. Software is written by people and it's written for people, and so digital talent matters. And so again, people is a huge part of what we're talking about in terms of doing this. And the other, which you already heard Ellen Lord say, is that software is not hardware. And we can't use the same process that we use for hardware for software. That just won't work. And so those three themes cut through everything that we're doing. And in the main report, we've written 4 chapters that try to articulate those themes and sort of say why they're important and how we think focusing on those primary themes will help guide us forward. In terms of the recommendations, what we did was to think about breaking this up into lines of effort. As the National Defense Strategy is broken up into lines of effort, we thought that was a good organizing principle for what we did. And so there are 4 primary lines of effort that our recommendations fall under. The first one has to do with refactoring the statutes, the second one with creating digital infrastructure, the third with new paths for digital talent, and the fourth with changing the practice. And so that's the main report, and there we have the big recommendations. And again, that fits in about 50 pages or so, but a lot of the detail, and in particular, sort of first cut at an implementation plan, so a draft implementation plan, is something that we put into the appendices. There are about 200 pages in the supporting information, and included in that is a lot of detail on not just here's the recommendation, but here's some initial ideas for how to get that started. And so in the appendices, you'll see draft implementation plan, some of the template legislative language that we were asked to provide, as well as a lot of additional material, including the concept papers and other things. So that's sort of the way the report is organized. There's basically 2 big documents. You all will see them come out on Monday. These are the ones that we're deliberating on today, Monday or Tuesday of next week, after they go through security review. And those will be the main report, which has the primary recommendations in it, as well as the supporting information that has a lot more detail. So the kind of structure then is we thought about these big themes. We thought about the lines of effort. In the recommendations, we started with, geez, it must have been about 500 things that we were thinking about that we grouped. And in the first iteration that came out in January of this, we had it down to about 48 potential recommendations that we threw out. We got input. We had an industry roundtable and sort of talked about those. We got input from people within the department and others about whether or not those were the right ones. We used that to cut it down to about 30 recommendations we put on our second iteration that came out in February. And so kind of cut that down a little bit. And finally, in this iteration, we have identified 10 primary recommendations that we think are the most important thing that the Department and Congress can work on and do together to improve our ability to use software. And then 16 additional recommendations that we think are also important, but we want to focus on those top 10 and get those going. And again, as Ellen Lord already said, we hope those will get going and get started today, and we think that's exactly the right approach. And then the 16 additional ones are ones to look at and think about, and as we get those top 10 done and you're looking for something to do, well, there's more to do. And then within each of those recommendations, again, an implementation plan. And so what I'd like to do is to walk you through those elements and just kind of reiterate what I've said briefly before in terms of the themes, what the lines of actions are, and then we'll walk through some of those. So in terms of the themes, there are 3 primary themes. So the first one is that speed and cycle time are the most important metrics for software. It's not the only thing, right? Security matters, code quality matters, right? But we really need to be thinking about how do we get speed and cycle time to be first and foremost what we're focused on. We need to be able to get secure, high quality, useful software out to the field and have it be used. And so anything that gets in the way of that is something that we ought to be looking at and saying, does it need to get in the way of that, right? That doesn't mean we're going to, put out poor quality software, right? But it means we need to put out high quality software quickly, right? And so we need to do things where we automate the processes that we use to check the software, that we make sure that all the checks and balances we needed to get out there can go quickly. And so speed and cycle time matter. And so we need to do that. The second, as I've already mentioned in terms of themes, is that software is made by people and for people, so digital talent matters. And we use the word digital talent to kind of capture the fact that it's not just programmers, but it's the entire development team, and it's people who think about the way digital technologies work, the way software works, and that can go all the way from the acquisition workforce through to the development team, people who think about user interfaces, right? All of that activity is about people, and so we really need to capture that. And last, that software is different than hardware, and the type of diagram that you see on the right-hand side, which is tuned a little bit for hardware, is just not going to work for software, right? And so the traditional DoD 5000.02 process, and this is a little bit older iteration of it that's gotten ridiculed many times, and so we'll do that again, and it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still hardware focused, right? And it is looking at something that is going to take 10 years to deploy and be out there for 30 years, and software just isn't that way. Software is not something that's ever done. Software is something that requires continuous iteration, and that continuous iteration requires lots of changes compared to the way we might do things with hardware. All right, so those are the three primary themes. Then in terms of our recommendation, we broke them into 4 lines of effort. So the first is that we do believe that we need to refactor the statutes, regulations, and processes for software. And again, you've already heard this. This means that there are, we believe, opportunities for new statutes that are tuned for software. We should say that we believe that it is possible to do the things that need to be done with the current regulations. Congress has provided the authority to do that, but you have to do a lot of work sometimes to get that authority to work for you. And we believe that having statutes that say, for software, this is the preferred pathway, and this is the category of appropriations that we should use for software, will advance the department's ability to take advantage of software. And so we think that it's important to go and define that separate path so that that's the default path for software, rather than saying, well, you know, here's kind of a complicated path, and you can do it this way, and you can do it this way, and getting a whole bunch of people to say, oh yeah, don't forget that if you sort of use this particular exception under, right, you know, sort of Title 10, 43, da-da-da, right, that you can kind of go that way. You know, we think that it would make more sense to really define that. And so refactoring the statutes, regulations, and processes for software, and again, as Ellen Lord said, I think that's already starting within the department on the regulations and processes side, and we think that there's some opportunities for the department working with Congress to refactor the statutes as well, and we have some language about that. The second line of effort is to create and maintain cross-program, cross-service digital infrastructure. And again, Ellen Lord already mentioned this, the need for GFE, government-furnished equipment that can allow a small company or a large company, although the large companies, as she said, don't have this problem, to quickly be able to deploy things. Stacks that are pre-approved, for example, software stacks that are pre-approved and have the right security and other things around them are things that will vastly increase our ability to get great ideas that can be encoded in software out to the field quickly. And so all of that digital infrastructure, that's compute infrastructure, it's software infrastructure, it's security infrastructure. There's a lot of things that go underneath that digital infrastructure. The third is on the workforce side, and so creating new paths for digital talent, and especially for internal talent. So we believe that there's a tremendous amount of internal talent within the government, you know, from the enlisted ranks to the officers to the civilians, and that we ought to be leveraging that more than we are, and that there are some ways to do that. And again, we'll have a set of recommendations against that. And finally, you know, this often gets lumped under culture, but we don't want to just use the word culture. We want to use the word practice, right? It is important to change the practice of how software is procured and developed within the defense enterprise. And so again, we have a number of recommendations about how to do that. So for each of these 4 lines of effort, there are, you know, I guess on order, 10-ish recommendations, but there are 2 or 3 that are our primary recommendations under each line of effort, the place where we believe the department should focus its effort first. And so what we'll do is to go through those top 10 recommendations and describe to you what we think are the most important things for Congress and the department to work together on to implement. And in each of those, there's a sort of statement of the recommendation, and then we're going to just show you, and you probably won't be able to read it in detail here, the kind of draft action plan that goes along with that draft implementation plan, which consists of a number of actions. And this is really us saying, you know, fine, we get the recommendation, but how do we do that? Well, here's an initial condition for how we think to do that, and that we hope the department will jump quickly and turn that draft implementation plan into a real implementation plan that really is what the department is going to do going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael to introduce the first 5 of those top 10 recommendations.
Great. Thanks, Richard. And we'll have plenty of time for discussion amongst the DIB at the end, but if people want to interrupt at any point as we go through the 10, that's perfectly a good way to do this. I want to I want to comment on 2 word patterns that show up often in the document, so to help you understand what we mean. The first of those is, and Richard used this, software is never done. So for my congressional colleagues that are here in the audience, for the people who manage programs in the department and worry about budgets, software is never done does not mean I will spend your money forever. Software is never done is a statement that, as Milo likes to say, first of all, software in the field decays with age. And therefore, the software that you thought was secure and meeting its requirements today is not doing that in the future. That means as the way we conceptualize the way we do software, we have to be conceptualizing that software will continue to be iterated, will continue to be upgraded either for new features and or for new vulnerabilities, et cetera. That does not mean we are throwing budgetary restraint out the window. It just means that the way we approach software has to be different than I did it, it was done, and then if you want me to fix it later, you have to pay a lot more money. That's what software is never done means. The second is, and it shows up in our themes, that software is different than hardware, and there are different kinds of software. The ask I would make for all of you and everybody who will read this report is that while it is very clear that embedded software code is different than a travel system that I should be buying lock, stock, and barrel from a commercial supplier, that is not a thing to hide behind. You're not special everywhere. And so when there's a set of recommendations here, running for cover by saying, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me because I'm in this category, that's not a good starting point. The starting point is to say, where is my software not special? Where is the software that is integrated with a weapon system that does include embedded code? What part of that software is not embedded code and should be conceptualized differently? So as we go through those, please keep in mind that we really mean something by different rules for different kinds of software, but you should try and use the best rules, the most important rules that are available to you. Okay, so recommendation A1, and you'll see, as Richard said, there's the line of effort that it's associated with, there's the draft implementation plan, and our proposed path forward on the draft implementation plan is not that you will end up with a checklist against the action items listed here, but you will end up with a process that says, for each action I take, am I delivering more value to the user of that software? So recommendation A1 in the line of effort around refactoring is to establish a new acquisition pathway for software that prioritizes continuous integration and delivery of working software in a secure environment or secure method to the field with continuous oversight. So there's a lot of words in there. It means we need to be moving to a pathway for software that allows us to continuously deliver value, to deliver that value using a set of prescribed tools that allow us to be secure and measuring automatically the performance of the software as we go. That means the software development environments need to be implemented, the software deployment environments need to be implemented, and overall we move to a DevSecOps method of doing software, and we have a pathway that allows us to do that. I will say point blank, and it shows up in the document, we all believe, and we have been schooled by all of you in many ways, to realize that you can accomplish everything in this recommendation by finding a way to wind your way through the exceptions and other authorities in existing pathways that exist. Existing pathways. So there is a way to do this, and frankly, we make heroes out of people who find a way to maneuver, not manipulate, maneuver the current system to do what's here. We believe that that's a waste of effort, and the reason to have a defined pathway for software is precisely to recognize that software is different, and you should not be spending your time finding a way through the system. You should use the most available tool, the easiest tool that's available to you, the tool that has the least impedance against what you want to accomplish. And creating a new pathway to do that is our first and primary recommendation. The second recommendation is to create a new appropriations category that defines software without reference to development, test, deployment, and maintenance. So a single appropriations category for life cycle of software. It should be consistent with the pathway for execution that we talked about, automatic metrics, automatic development environments, DevSecOps approaches, but a single budget item without any separation into the various categories that we have in place. A primary place to use that would be in the kinds of software where we know we will be delivering that kind of software forever. You can define a set of categories of endurance need software that we are always going to be spending on, not because we didn't get it done, but because the threat environment will change or the operational environment will change. And we believe those should be programmed as single kind of appropriation of money across the life cycle. So that's A2. In line of effort B, which is about creating and maintaining cross-program, cross-service digital infrastructure, there's a couple of recommendations I want to talk about, which are about the ease with which we need to be able to execute software rapidly. So the first is to establish and maintain digital infrastructures within each service or agency. enlists rapid deployment of secure software into the field with incentives to use those secure articulated systems by people who are delivering software for the Department of Defense. This is not the only tool. If you have capability, if you're a large enough entity that you have a secure environment and you have the authorities that you need to execute, that's fine. But we believe that the system in general benefits by having established and available infrastructure that can be drop shipped in to create an environment and move forward as quickly as possible. And so you'll see a set of implementation actions around that. So basically create a standard infrastructure that is ready and available to go. In the same category on digital infrastructure, recommendation B2 relates to the test and evaluation system. So to create and implement and support fully automated, integrated T&E, including security from the beginning, that allows high confidence distribution of software to the field on an iterative and rapid basis. So move T&E from what historically, I say historically because there's been a lot of progress in recent times, but move T&E from what has historically been a tailgate process to an integrated portion of an iterative DevSecOps process, okay? And then the third category here, if I get it here, is to, am I on the right? Yeah. Create and implement authorities to operate reciprocity. We should not, if we are in a circumstance where a program develops software that is used in two places in the same service, or software that is developed in one service and used in another service, those should not require the duplicative work of ATO authorization to be able to move forward. Now, go back to what I said before, we need to be smart. You know, the software I developed that runs on one kind of network may need different authorities to operate on another kind of network. Point number one, try and figure out why the networks are different. Do they really need to be different? But point number two, if the environments in which the software is being used and the environments in which the user community is implementing the software, we should have ATO reciprocity both across the service and then from service to service. So three recommendations around digital infrastructure to move forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Richard for the next 5.
Great, thank you, Michael. The next 5 are moving to the other lines of effort. And so the first of those is in the line of effort of creating new paths for digital talent, especially internal talent. And this is an area where we believe that the services need to start thinking about their software talent in the same way as they think about their warfighting talent, because software is what we use to define modern warfare. And so we need to create software development units within each service consisting of both military and civilian personnel who can develop and deploy software to the field using DevSecOps practices. So we believe that we really do need programmers. We believe that there are people within the enlisted ranks, people that are reservists, people that we can bring in as IPAs and other things. We believe the talent is out there, and we believe that we can make use of that talent within the Department of Defense. And so this is something where, you know, as we've gone around and seen people in uniform, for example, who are developing code and seen what they can do, we are convinced that this is an area that the department can take advantage of and can make use of. And so we've put both a recommendation that the department do that, but also a way to get started in terms of that draft implementation plan to move that forward. I want to say that I think that's important for a number of reasons, and it'll come up in the next recommendation. You know, in the end, when you are managing software, right, and either on the acquisition side or on the development side doing that, having experience in software makes a huge difference. And some fraction of those people who come in and come into the military and do software are going to stay in the military, or they're going to go out to civilian lives and then come back and help our country. And so I think that we really want to think about giving that experience of working in software, you know, to people in the services, both, again, on the civilian and military side. So we think that's important. The second workforce recommendation is on the side of making use of training programs for the acquisition community, CIOs, SAEs, PEOs, PMs, that provides hands-on insight into modern software development. There are lots of training programs out there. You go and you take a course and you have a certificate. We believe that really thinking about have you worked in a development environment? That might mean that I went out and I did a 2-week boot camp on what it's like to release software every night and have it go through a continuous integration, continuous deployment process, and you know what GitHub is, and you sort of know how all of those processes work, and you know what unit tests are, and you know what Docker is, and right, all of those things, right? Because that's what software looks like. And if you're managing a program and somebody's throwing all those words around, it would really help if you could say, oh yeah, right, that's like the way modern software is done. And so we need to get better at that. We need to provide opportunities for people within the acquisition workforce to get that type of experience and to think about how to do that. So things like boot camps and other things we think are a really good idea there. I should say, and you know, this goes throughout, this and just about everything else we've said is not a new recommendation. And so these have been said many times before. And one of the things you'll see when you go look at the detailed implementation plans, we put all of the times, right, that other committees have said these things. One of the things that I love to do is to go back to the Defense Science Board 1987 study, right? So now, how many years ago is that? 32 years ago? And say, yeah, they said that. Right? And one of the quips is that if you go and replace, they said we should use ADA. If you replace ADA with Agile and read that report, you're pretty close to what we're recommending.
By the way, how many people here know what ADA is? Okay, that's disturbing.
Yes, I was going to say. Too bad. But nonetheless, the broader themes of that report are dead on in terms of what has to happen, and you'll see echoes of that going through here, including the need to have an acquisition workforce that really understands software. So those are two primary workforce recommendations. Finally, the last line of effort is on changing the practice of how software is procured and developed. And our first recommendation there is to require access to source code, software frameworks, and development tool chains with appropriate IP rights for DoD-specific code. Why? To enable full security testing and rebuilding of binaries from source. So this one, I have to say, industry's totally on board with this one. They see, you know, give us the source code. They go, absolutely, we're with you. And so this is the one, of course, we've gotten the most feedback from industry about what the heck are you talking about? No way. But why is it important? It's important because you cannot really make sure that your software is secure without looking at the source code, right? And again, we like to quip, and I think it's probably less than a quip, that our adversaries have our source code. Why wouldn't we provide that to the department? And how do you check for security vulnerabilities? You scan the source code and look for where those security vulnerabilities are. But also, you need to be able, if the hardware is changing underneath you and you're really separating that, you need to be able to recompile it as you put it onto new source code, onto new hardware. And so that ability to really recompile that code, to link it with other modules and do other things. Now, that doesn't mean that you give the department the source code and they can go distribute it to all your competitors or anything else. Of course not, right? There are IP rights that go along with that. Those have to be negotiated and all of the things. If a company is bringing to you, think of a small company, right, that they're bringing to you something that they developed on their own money, of course they should get compensated for the use of that software, and we want to do that, right? So we recognize that. I'll also say that this is one of the spots where this question comes up a lot, right? Sort of, do you really mean that industry should develop source code? So one of the other things that we did is we put a frequently asked questions, a fact page together. It's in our supporting information, and that's one of the facts, right? It's sort of, you know, what do you really mean? And we try to, you know, articulate it a little bit more, answering those specific questions. We had maybe 12 or 13 frequently asked questions, and so every time somebody comes up and says, oh yeah, we've answered that one before, we try and put it there so we can point you at that. So, and I'll mention that again. Okay, so, but we think that it is important to have access to the source code for those reasons. The second primary recommendation in the area of changing the practice is to make security a first-order consideration for all software-intensive systems, recognizing that security at the border is not enough. And so this has already come up. Security, cybersecurity, Ellen Lord mentioned this, you know, this has to be something that is primary consideration as we're developing software. Defense software is going to be under attack. That's just pretty much by definition. And if you don't bake the security in it right at the very beginning, then you're in trouble. And it can't just be, oh, it's on a network that's protected, and so therefore nobody can get into the network, and so it'll all be okay. Because once you get inside that network, I think Milo said, you know, then you get to the chewy middle, right? And all of a sudden you have access to everything, right? And so if you have any violation of that border security, all right, then you're in real trouble. So it has to be security at depth. It cannot just be assuming that, right, it's secure at the border. And so that's something that we think is important. And that's going to require new standards for how we develop software and thinking about what does that mean in a DoD context. Okay, and then the last primary recommendation, number 10, in the area still of changing the practice, is to really shift, and again, this is hardware, not software, to shift from the use of rigid lists of requirements for software to a list of desired features and required interfaces and characteristics that will allow us to better make use of software so we can avoid requirements creep, overly ambitious requirements, or program delays. The thing that annoys us the most is to go in and somebody say, here's the requirements for the software program. They were established 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? And we still haven't delivered on all those requirements, so the software is not out there. You've got to be kidding. We've been living with software that is not satisfying the needs of the people who are out there, right? Taking their own risks, right? By using old software while they're waiting, just because, right? Somebody tried to figure out, sort of 10 years ago what all of the possible requirements are we could want for this wonderful piece of software, right? And then when we're finished with those requirements, we can deliver it, right? Maybe that works for a piece of hardware where you're going to really have to build it and use it for the next 20 years, and you really want to think about those things. But we think that, the way modern software development works is, of course, you have a set of core things that must be there, the interface characteristics, the requirements that have to be there. But then everything else is really a list of features. These are the things we'd like it to be able to do, and you want to just iterate on that, right? Here's the most important features for our next sprint, and that sprint might be that something you're going to deliver in 2 weeks or 2 months, depending on the type of software. They're not all the same. And then once you've delivered that set or decided, we're just not going to get there, but let's kick out what we've got because it's still useful, now go back and look at the next set of features that you want to implement, right? And those features should be getting updated as people in the field are using it and saying, what would be really cool, that thing you just put out there, that's really neat, but what would be really neat is if you could link it to this other system. Great, put that on the feature list, right? Let's rack and stack that. So this is an iterative process, it's an ongoing process, it's part of having an enduring capability within a software area. We say, look, we're going to be, tracking objects in space forever, basically, right? And so what features do we want as we do that, right? How do we integrate these in? So moving from that kind of requirements, hardware style of a mindset into a software mindset, a features-based mindset, is our last recommendation for changing the practice. Okay, so as I mentioned at the start, these are our top 10 recommendations. These are the things that we think that Congress and the department working together should focus the most attention on. There are other things that can be done, and we hope that this report will last for 37 years, but that it'll all be checked off at the end of those 37 years, so maybe it'll be done a lot quicker than that. And so we do have a number of other recommendations, and those other recommendations there are 26 of them, 16 of them, 26 total, so 16 additional recommendations. And so I'm just going to flash them up here and not kind of go through them in detail. They are numbered by the line of effort that they go with. So you see on this page A3 through B6 down at the bottom. And so again, I won't go through these in detail, but these are recommendations aligned with the first 2 lines of effort of additional things that could be done. And so if we really get going on all of these quickly, as we hope that we do, and we're looking for the next set of things to do, we've put what we think the next set of things to do are. And then similarly, there's another set of recommendations, so this is the last set of 8 recommendations that go along with the lines of effort C and line of effort D. And so again, for each of these recommendations, we've put out a draft implementation plan with a list of actions. We've put, here are the various things that we had a large working group within the Pentagon that was helping us develop all of this, and so here are the things that the working group has said, and so we've put those so that you can see them, and the subgroup reports are there from the working group, and we've put the other recommendations. And I would encourage you, when you read it, it's about 2 pages per recommendation, to really read through the whole thing, right? Because you're going to see, the same themes coming up from other studies and other ways, and, maybe say, oh yeah, that's right, it now clicks because maybe our language doesn't, but their language does, and so we hope you'll look at those. Okay, so just remind you again that the primary report, about 50 pages or so, has all of the main recommendations as well as a list of these other recommendations, but there's a lot more information out there. So as somebody mentioned, one of the things that we did is we put together what are currently about 6 different vignettes. These are user stories, right? Sort of here's what it was like for me. And we hope you'll read those vignettes. They make it a little bit more personal in terms of, why the current process doesn't always work, and some of the heroics that people have to do to get the current process to work for them, and why we think having a new acquisition pathway and a new appropriations category really will make a big difference in terms of our ability to deploy that quickly. As I mentioned already, we have draft implementation plans that are out there for all of these. That's probably the biggest chunk of the appendix because for each of the 26, there's about 2 pages, so there's a good 50 pages or so. We've put out some proposed legislation and regulatory changes, and in particular, there's some template legislative language. Not our job to write the law, but we think that we can sort of say, here's what we think ought to look like. And that really goes along with those first 2 recommendations on the acquisition pathway and the appropriations category. category and really lines up with everything we're saying. So, one other thing I'll say is that these recommendations are interrelated, obviously, right? To some of them, in order to do it, you need to do some of the other ones, right? And so one of the things that you'll see in the appendices is a little bit of that dependency tree, right? So you see a graph that sort of shows, if you're going to implement this one, you also need to implement this one, right? And we hope you'll look at that because it's not, a complete Chinese menu. Just choose any of these 10 that you want, right, and sort of follow them, right? They do depend on each other in a way that, requires that, if this is going to be implemented, to do that, you have to have the digital infrastructure to do it, right? And so you can't, just do one and not the other. They're not all dependent on, all 10 don't necessarily have to be implemented, and we hope that they will be. We think they're important. Number 4 on there, one of the things that we got to look at was P-forms and R-forms. This is the process by which the budget is discussed with Congress. Holy cow. I don't know what you guys are doing, but I don't know how you make use of those for software. And so we've actually put up a little bit of a framework that we think for providing better information. And one of the things we did is we really think that that information should get drawn from the information that's already in the development environment, right, in terms of what are the feature lists, how quickly are we going through those, how well is the program doing, and other things. So really thinking about having an information flow that is pulling information that's actually used and making use of that in providing to Congress.
You have been removed from the call. Goodbye.
Bye. We're done. Somebody's going to probably log that back in. Those are there. Frequently asked questions I've mentioned. We've put in our guides to software. These are basically our concept papers, as well as the working group reports, some work that we did on data analytics and machine learning in terms of the current information that's out there. All of this we hope will be useful. And then there's some of the acronyms and a glossary for some of the terms we're using. So that's what our report is. I think, as we said at the beginning, it's really less about the report per se and more about the process and the iteration. Software is never done. This study is not quite done. And so as Ellen Lord mentioned and others have said, we do plan to continue over the next year in doing that. Okay, so with that, I'll end and hand it back over to Eric to lead us on.
Why don't we see if Milo...
Oh, yeah, sorry. And so, so maybe we'll, if Jen is online, maybe we'll ask if Jen has any comments, and then Milo here in the room.
Jen may have had a technical difficulty.
Okay, so we'll ask Milo if Milo has any comments.
I think it's been really interesting to see how the department has sort of lagged behind industry in adopting industry technology. The department made a decision a long time ago that it was going to ride the commercial sector, the technology and the systems that the commercial sector produces, not build its own computers, its own software infrastructure, et cetera. And I think much of the change here, much of the tension in how the department has in terms of dealing with software is the result of not willing to actually fully embrace the commercial process. So once you made a decision to ride the commercial path, you now don't really get an option. You have to follow the commercial path. And just like where corporate America has changed its practices, its tools, its infrastructure, if you're going to ride that commercial path, the department has to do the same. And I think you don't get the option to stop along the way. Stopping is not safe. Stopping in a convoy in a dangerous area is not safe. Stopping in the current threat environment that we operate in is not safe. So software ages badly. I think we've discussed that before. I do think also one of the dynamics is the interlinking of communications and compute. They used to be much more discrete. Now they are fully interlinked. And if you think about cloud services, you can dealing with moving to the cloud without dealing with moving to modern telecommunications and bandwidth, you're not going to be successful. So that's part of the reason why we have the networking pieces have been woven in here as well. It's been a great experience. I will also say we very rarely have met folks that we thought were trying to do the wrong thing. They do exist, but there are not that many of them. Most people here really want to accomplish the right thing. They just don't know how to do it, or they're trapped in a set of processes and procedures that cause them to have the wrong incentives. Things like measuring source lines of code, right? Which we think is evil. And the industry has really moved away from that as a metric because it encourages bad behavior. There are things like that, and I think we've got a great workforce if we give them the right path, make it easy to do the right thing and difficult to do the wrong thing. Will make the department a much more capable, much more lethal organization to deal with.
So let's get some comments from the board. Questions, disagreement, agreement. Who would like to start? Go ahead.
Sure. First, I'd like to say that I've worked with a lot of different committees and subcommittees on various boards. This one was one of the most diligent, one of the most thorough, and I think one of the ones that have produced the most amount of turns on documents that I've ever seen. But it was all in a wonderful, all these people are volunteers. Everything you heard today was from people who have other jobs during the day. And it is really a pleasure to have joined the board to do this. I think at the core of everything that we talk about, and we've mentioned multiple times, is the concept of people, the people behind this. And I'd like to maybe ask the committee, the discussions that we've had relative to the ones that I've supported and felt very passionate about treating the people who are coming up through this process as being significant players in their own right. Coding language is no different in many ways in knowing a foreign language and being treated like a foreign language, for example, in the processes of moving up through the different services. Could you address and talk about your views on that and sort of consolidate the things that we've talked about regarding that?
Yeah, I'll start, and then other members of the study can chime in. So thank you, Mark. I think that indeed one of the things that the Defense Innovation Board has said for a long time is that computer science needs to be a core competency of the department. And one of the things that we've seen is that capability is there. And you know, we put on purpose in our line of effort recognizing internal talent because we see that internal talent and we need to find ways to really leverage that internal talent and let talented people do the things that they can do. And sometimes the system gets in the way of that, and so you know, we've articulated here some paths we hope that will make that easier in terms of people being able to do that. But it is about people, and in the end, if we can't both attract the right people in, if we can't retain them, right, or some fraction of them, I would say, and again, it's one of our additional recommendations, is that you know, the department's going to have to get used to something that I think commercial industry has gotten used to, which is that people don't stick around forever, right? And so you're not going to have a situation where you have all of your workforce are 30-year veterans, right, and 20-year you know, of that particular thing. People move between companies all the time, and the processes have to recognize that that's going to happen. And you need to both be bringing new people in, but allowing people to go out and do the next thing that's the right thing for them. I think that's particularly nice in the context of the military and government, because you can come into government, do something for a couple of years, go back out, and still be helping that same group, right? Now you're, you know, starting a company, or you're part of a bigger company, but you have that insight in how things go. So I think you got it exactly right, Mark. I think we've talked a lot about people and how that's important, and we've made in our recommendations and action plans, tried to put some effort in trying to say, you know, how do we both capture that internal talent, recognize that internal talent, promote that internal talent to allow them to do all of those things. Michael or Milo?
Let's get some more questions or comments. Looking to my left, my right, Eric and Missy.
So I've seen a lot of reports. I've been part of committees that have produced dozens and dozens and dozens of reports. Let me first start by saying this is like the clearest, cleanest, most engaging writing that I have ever seen in a report. Anybody who you know, you haven't seen it yet, but you got to read the vignettes. To have a report like this that bases a section on a political thriller, to have a section about self-denial of service, to highlight the wonderful hashtag AgileAF with its full range of meanings. You don't see that very often. And I think that clarity of writing is so important because it bespeaks a clarity of thinking. This takes what always seems like your marvelous chart of all the various different things that have to be done, and it somehow falls away into an incredible clarity of thinking. This has the potential to be a transformative document, a go-to document to help all the people who do want to do the right thing to get it done, because this is the kind of thing that you know is tweetable. When you get it, I hope you tweet the best parts. I think this is something you can wave around to get things done. I'm wildly enthusiastic about it, but I have a question. My question is, even the most amazingly clear report is not self-implementing. So I want to ask, how are we going to, over the course of the next year or two, support the work? And we don't implement. We're a FACA committee. I appreciate that. But there's nothing in the law that prevents us from helping those who do implement. And I think the next 24 months is going to be a critical period to determine whether this is a transformative report or simply a really well-written report that will take its place with other reports over the last 37 years. So I'm all about the implementation right now. What can you tell us about how we're going to support the people in the department who are going to, and in the Congress, who are going to get this done?
Thanks, Eric, and thanks for the kind comments about the writing. And I will go off script for a minute and just, these things always happen by a group of people. I will tell you that the person sitting 2 seats from the right of me is the most astonishing writer and project manager I have ever had the opportunity to work with. Thank you. Kudos. So thank you. So Eric, I think, has gotten to the nub of the question. Much as we would all like to get a little sleep after finishing the report, that's the easy work. And you heard from Undersecretary Lord about her commitment to moving out and executing what's here. There are a couple of places we're going to engage in that. One, she has asked us to be part of the rollout of this from an announcement and public positioning, et cetera. So we will be part of that. She has asked us to be, as the SWAP team and the DIB, to be consultants and advisors in the implementation plans that she moves forward with. So we will be a part of that for at least the next year. And probably, and Eric mentioned this before, probably the most important thing is that the team that has been in the Pentagon working with us, so the Courtney, Devin, Jeff, Sandy team that we'll recognize again and again, have been funded to stay on and help with the implementation of this plan. So, so I think we're all in continuing to support this going forward. And then last thing I would say is I would just reiterate what we said before. We will judge the success of this the way we judge software. So every day we will come to work and we will say, are people who use the software better than they were before this report came out? Not, did you execute action item A.3.6?
Sure, but let me ask, is there going to be like a stand-up or something? Or are we going to have some regular process where somebody transparently and comprehensively is evaluating, how do we do?
Yeah, so I'll take a little bit of that. If you actually look at what we recommend in terms of our timeline, it is in fact that not only did this draft implementation get turned into a real implementation plan, but also that the department and potentially Congress ask for our help in evaluating that and continuing to be involved. And so we think that that's something that we are ready to do. And Michael and I co-chair the S&T subcommittee, and the S&T subcommittee has said to Undersecretary Lord, we are happy to help provide that input, provide that outside view, and to help move these things forward. It's important.
What do you think is the frequency?
Yeah, that's. I think we haven't thought through that far. We already are. We do our quarterly meetings and other things, and so that's probably something where no less than quarterly we come out and kind of take a look at things would be my guess. And again, that'd be a natural thing for us to do.
So there was an offline conversation about how does continuous change occur in a large institution like the DoD, and the sort of consensus was that it really occurs when a single leader has a clear vision and has sort of the toughness, if you will, to push it in against the antibodies which exist in any large organization. And there were a set of transformative leaders in the history of the DoD that have done that. And so my guess is that an individual or a small team will have to both agree with our recommendations, which I think in general people will, but then they'll also have to have both the time and the support to implement it. And time means not a quarter, it means like years.
Right.
And my guess is that's how it really works. More comments or questions, Neil?
I didn't serve on this subcommittee, but reading the report, I'd like to echo the sentiment that it's not only brilliantly written, it's got content that you cannot imagine a rational objection to it. And that's a really good place for a report to live, so that maybe you don't need the single leader to charge it through the antibodies. Maybe the antibodies will disperse all on their own because everyone will see how significant the value of the report is, and its meaning will be manifest to all who come near it.
So your new title is Dr. Optimist.
Okay, sorry. But I'd like to say, if I can sort of tie a bow on some of what has already been said, in my life I probably coded about 10,000 lines of software, less than most who are professional programmers, but it's enough to sort of feel it and know and allow me to reaffirm as someone who is not otherwise a stakeholder other than being a citizen of this country. I don't work for a software company. I'm an academic, I'm a scientist, I'm an educator, but I can tell you, reaffirm what you already know, that software is a living, breathing thing. And you know this implicitly because you get software updates every other day to your smartphone and to your computer. And these updates, they patch security holes, they offer capability, they offer enhancements, and you just take that for granted. And to imagine that this is not an easy thing to have happen in the one agency that is tasked with bringing security to the nation is an astonishing revelation to me walking into this. Also, I want to say, and there is a mild question at the end of this, I don't know enough about the culture of the military to know is it okay going forward that our concept of a force, a military force, includes geeks in a back room coding. There was a day when it was how many missiles are in your silo or how many troops are on the ground. And now we're talking about people who might not be able to do 50 push-ups in whatever is the boot camp that is their training, yet they become a fundamental part of the security of this nation. So I'm just curious, is the culture ready to embrace the career software person in this universe that we're functioning in? I fully endorse it, but what does my opinion matter here? It's just, we have to recognize the changing landscape of warfare, and I wonder how much resistance that will bring.
Kurt, you wanted to make a comment? Okay.
Can I say a little about this one, just to say something? So on this, I think it's a great point, Neil. I think what we've seen is that there are examples showing it's possible. So when we look at what happens within something like Kessel Run in the Air Force, or we look at what happens within JIDO, or we look at what happens with DDS, just as examples, we see people doing this, right? So we believe it's possible.
An existence proof.
There's an existence proof. They are having to work tremendously hard to make all of that happen. And in some of the vignettes, we talk about that, and so you can read a little bit more about that. So we believe it's possible. We see the talent that's there. We see the ability when somebody stands up and says, I am going to protect this for a while and make it happen. We see that it can happen. We see the struggles that those groups have as all of those antibodies don't just disperse, right? But come glomming on and saying, whoa, there's something here that doesn't look familiar, right? And so we better attack that, and we do see that. And so I think we see the existence proof, but we also know it's going to take work, right? And you're absolutely right that, and these are people in uniform, often out of uniform at the time they're coding, right? Because that's the kind of environment they're in. But they are uniformed military who are doing this. So we believe it's possible.
Without that cultural shift, what you're up against is the fact that in any population of people who want to serve when you don't have a draft, there'll be some subset of them who love to code. And if that's not rewarded, there's no reason for them to stay. There's no reason for them to seek the next levels. We have that for medical doctors and for pastors and for
lawyers,
trombone players. And so, as was noted, thinking of programming as a language, that's an asset. And I remember my first dream in a foreign language was actually in Fortran. So it was like, just so you know. Oh, thank you for applause. And the one man who remembers Fortran in the front row.
A Fortran programmer in the front row.
It's just so again, these are capabilities that enable the warfighter.
I would just add one coda on it because I think you're absolutely right. And I think we mentioned it at our previous public meeting as an existence proof. The Air Force now has a program that recognizes computer languages in the same way that it recognizes foreign spoken languages.
It's real.
It's at least real in one place, and that's a sort of element of the record of the individual airman. So there's work.
I just want Kurt to say whether he was a Fortran 66 or a Fortran 77 programmer.
That's a good question. I think 77, but I go way back.
Oh, 77.
You know, the other thing I would add there is having spent some time at HHS working on healthcare.gov when it crashed. When I came back to Microsoft, the first thing that we established was a rotation program where you could actually leave Microsoft temporarily, go in service to the government, and then we would bring you back. And we did all the legal things about the separation, et cetera. And that was, out of my experience, that's one of the things that started that. And I think I'd applaud the group for having kind of codified what modern software development looks like in places like Microsoft. You know, when I started, I used to lead the Office division, and we would pride ourselves that we would ahead of time know, 2.5 years ahead of time, the exact date we would ship the next version of Office, which was an amazing accomplishment in thousands and thousands of developers. We don't build software that way anymore. We build it on a semester schedule. We say, this is what we're trying to achieve in this period of time. So I think one thing that will be great is to be able to match the cultures by having this back and forth between the two organizations so that we can share. And I think we'll get to that point of where there's similarity much more quickly as a result. The question I have, though, is we spend some time talking about how this will work with government and how it will work with Congress in particular. And one thing that strikes me is if we get into that same iterative process where Congress has different expectations about what the software will do and what the requirements will do, we'll get to that iteration of them, and they'll get more satisfaction of what the outputs are from the projects that they're listing. And so I wonder whether we talk about that a little bit.
I can say a little about that. I think one of the things we talked about, and Congress has asked us to come and talk to them about what we've been doing, and we've had some of those questions and other things. I think one of the things that we've said is, that we think that having better insight allows better oversight, right? And we think that much better insight is possible for software, certainly than using P-forms and R-forms, which provide practically no insight near as I can tell about software, but rather something that is saying, here's how this program is going, here's what our current cycle time is for getting changes out, here's the current list of features, here how quickly we're putting features in. Here's how many programmers we have on the team, something that Eric has brought up before. We need to be able to count the number of programmers and the number of the rest of the development team. So I think you got it exactly right, Kurt, that we do need to think about, Congress has a role in overseeing that and making decisions about what the allocations are and other things, and they need to have the right information in order to be able to do that, and we think that there are better ways to get that information than what they currently have. And I think, again, in this iterative nature, we need to try out some of those better ways, see what works, improve on them, and it won't be the same for every type of software, all right? So that's just the other thing. Right? There may be multiple pathways or versions of pathways. There are different types of information for different types of software. We think all of that's important.
The other thing can I just add one thing? So the other thing I would say is, and Richard and I have worked together outside of this environment for a number of years. I actually hate the word pilot, and I think we've tried to expunge pilot as many places as we can. Pilot, to me, conveys a message that I'll try it, and if it works, I'll then do it 100 times, which is exactly not iterative. And so when you look at the way many of the congressional recommendations are in here, the regulatory things, the policy, they are really thought to be iterative. So we're going to try it, and we're not going to believe that if we try it and it works, that's the end state. We're going to try it, and if it doesn't work, maybe that's the end state. But if it works, what makes it even better? And that's what we're trying to accomplish in the interaction with Congress.
So
Let's make sure we get some more comments. Missy?
Thanks, Eric. I actually just want to pull the trump card here and say I actually programmed in Ada and Fortran 77 in uniform, so I believe I should get some kind of veterans compensation for that anguish. Yes, one thing that I think that was really important that got glossed over this morning is the critical role of software as its own acquisition pipeline. It is such a strong psychological tendency for civilian leaders and also military leaders to want the thing. I want the hypersonic aircraft. I want the weapon. I want the carrier. I want the physical manifestation of whatever is cool in terms of a military platform. And as a former program manager, I can tell you always software gets relegated to the very end of the requirement pipeline. And this is a very strong, it's still very much going on today. I would say, there's been some concern here, oh, we're really worried more about the small guys than the big companies. And I'll actually tell you, I actually think the reverse of that. I think the big companies are so entrenched in their poor software acquisition and development programs that I actually think that is going to be a huge obstacle to get around. And the government, and this is why, Secretary Lord, I think it's just so important to emphasize and incentivize companies to understand that actually I think we've reached that tipping point. Software is unquestionably, in my mind, the most important component of military systems, but that's not how companies, and that's not how generals, and that's not how senior leaders actually, when they go to buy a system, that's not what they're thinking.
Can we have some, on the phone, do we have comments from board members that if the phone link is back on?
It's Walter. I just wanted to reiterate what Eric Lander said, that this is a fascinating, well-written report, unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of government report writing. And I would like to both suggest and add that we try to find ways to make this more public, maybe talking to some people who cover this in the newspapers, and even trying to get some of the leaders of this group on television shows to allow the public to read this.
Walter.
Yes, thank you, Walter. Are there, and I certainly agree with that, are there other comments from folks on the phone? Marnie, are you there? Jen? Okay.
Sorry, I am here. I just wanted to, it's very echoey on the phone, so I just wanted to also just add my praise for the report. It reads so well. I found it I learned a bunch, but it was also consistent with my experience at work. And I hope Congress also pays attention to this important report. And I just thought it was really heartening to hear Secretary Laura's comments and how affirming they were of the recommendations in the report, which makes me hopeful for the future.
Excellent. Does anybody have any final comments or further conversation about the report? This is an important action on the part of the DIB. Left, looking to the right. Are we ready for a vote?
Yes, sir.
How would you like us to conduct the vote?
I think a voice vote probably is adequate. You can ask for yea, nay, and abstentions, if that works for you.
Is that the same thing as all in favor?
It is the same as that, yeah.
Okay. So we get
Well, we can't make a secret vote? We don't want to.
Everything about this process has been transparent. Now we're going to have a secret vote. Okay, got it. Okay, so let's try the following. Who is in favor of approving this? Who are members of the DIB in good standing? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay. Is there anyone who is opposed to approving this vote? And I'm voting yes, by the way. And is there anyone who would like to abstain from this vote? Does it therefore follow that we have a unanimous yes, Josh?
It does.
Okay, the report is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There you go, Richard.
Great. So we will now have a short session of the Science and Technology Subcommittee where we'll get two updates. The first update will be from Milo on 5G.
Thank you. When
it was interesting when the DepSec tasked the DepSec tasked our board, the Defense Policy Board, the Defense Science Board, and the Defense Business Board to come back and report on risks and opportunities with 5G. When that happened, I was like, what is going on here, right? Why is there so much interest in this? And I would say, when the department talks about 5G, it's a proxy for a couple of threads. One of them is on ecosystems, right? It's really not just about a particular wireless RAN protocol, right? It's about the ecosystems of technology, services, devices, semiconductors, spectrum. And it's interesting if you look at what happened with LTE, nominally called 4G, right? The US was the leader in that deployment. US, after Finland, was the first country that really had a pervasive LTE deployment that resulted in a material change in the amount of bandwidth available to consumers and to the applications that ran over that communication network. That is to say, it enabled a massive transformation in the way people used wireless infrastructure and wireless services. And the US benefited from that dramatically, both from, again, in devices, semiconductors, applications and services, as well as infrastructure. And I think part of the motivation for the department asking us to weigh in on this item is whether or not that position will remain constant or change with regards to 5G. Will the US have that same leverage and leadership? And much has been sort of discussed about what does it mean to be a leader in 5G. The question is, do you have people following you? So if you're a leader, people will follow you. People will use your services, your ecosystems, and if you're not, they won't. So that's one set of topics that we're working on and we'll address in a report. The second thread, when we talk to the Secretary and others about it, is the department is a consumer of technology, of communications infrastructure. And it was interesting, when I was working at NASA in the 90s and the 80s, all the high-end communications and compute R&D was done in the government. That was the place to be. Today, that is not the case. The commercial sector drives innovation in not just compute, but communications as well. And what that means is, can the department lever those innovations to improve its ability to do its business and conduct the business of warfighting? And that doesn't mean that warfighters on the battlefield are going to be buying 5G service from some carrier. But it means if you look at the component ecosystems, the RF component level, semiconductors, sort of the application processors, the radios, et cetera, the devices themselves and infrastructure elements that the department might choose to run, or services that they can acquire from others, how can the department move aggressively to take advantage of these commercial sector developments to enable it to prosecute its mission more cost-effectively, more capably, because the price of doing things differently, where you don't have volume, right, is really a challenge. So those are, I think, sort of how we've interpreted the tasking from OSD on this item. As Josh mentioned, parts of the report are classified, and that's made it more complicated for us to work on. We don't usually work on classified outputs from the board. So we're not going to go discuss a lot of this today, but I just wanted to set the context for why the department feels that this is an important issue to deal with.
So the timing is there's a report very soon. So Josh, that will be a public, there'll be some sort of public discussion about that report.
Yes,
Is
there
that
will.
correct? Roughly what is the time frame?
I think we'll be able to schedule that call in early April.
Early April. So the next event for the public would be something in early April. Okay. Is there anything else more you guys would like to talk about on the 5G stuff?
I would just say, you know, we think about spectrum as a key issue in this environment. 5G can operate in both sort of traditional macro spectrum, in what we think of as mid-band spectrum in the 3 or 4 gigahertz band, and in millimeter wave spectrum, right? So the real question is, there are multiple uses for each of those bands. But the question is, what's going to deliver that kind of transformative experience that can really drive much wider amounts of bandwidth through the network? And so it takes all kinds of spectrum to make this work. The department occupies a lot of spectrum that that is commercial in other countries. And so that requires the department to have to deal with those commercial uses of that spectrum at a minimum when its systems are forward deployed in other countries, as well as how to deal with uses of those spectrum inside the continental United States.
Okay, thank you, Milo. And Michael, I think you were perhaps going to discuss the AI principles work that we've been, you want to sort of take us through, give everybody an update on that.
Right. This is very quick. So those of you who were with us at the last meeting know that the Secretary had tasked the DIB to help with the process to generate public input as the department works to determine what additional principles or ethics or guidance it needs around the use of AI. Recognizing that the department already operates in areas where it has long history and constitutional law and agreements around ethical principles in the way it prosecutes its mission as a Department of Defense and in warfare. So the Secretary asked the DIB to set up a series of sessions to provide public input. We have completed 2 of 3 sessions. One was held in Boston in January. One was just completed 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago or last week, on the campus at Carnegie Mellon, and the third will be in late April at Stanford. Those consist of an opportunity for both conversation with people who are expert in the field, the discipline of AI, whether that's ethics or technology or science or implementation. But frankly, this is a public issue, and so it is also an opportunity to gather input and opinions from the public. So there's always a public listening session that's part of that. So work in progress. Would encourage any of you who want to come to the Bay Area at the end of next month to participate in that. And it's been a really nice way to hear from people who have, frankly, opinions and equities and stakes in all elements of the conversation around AI and its use in the department.